So you're looking to buy a Yamaha XS650. Well, here's all of the stuff that you need to know and consider before buying one of these machines right here. If you don't know too much about this machine right here, I did do a proper review on it, so make sure to check that out after this one. Just like a British bike, this has a 360-degree parallel twin, and this is a 650 motor. Getting into the more important things about the Yamaha XS650, the first thing you need to know is the difference between all of the model years. The XS650 was produced between 1969 and 1985. In this video, we're going to be going over more of the standard model. There's a standard model and later introduced a special model, but we'll talk about the special a little bit later. The Yamaha XS650 was first introduced in 1969, and it came in the beautiful green color. Notably, this was called the XS1, and major differences between this and the years to come were that the XS1 still had a drum brake in the front and was kickstart only. These bikes were very raw and they were very untamed, which is something that changes throughout the years. The motorcycle was still the XS1 until the late 70s when the XS1B came out. The XS1 and XS1B were very similar. They just got a little bit of carburetor tuning and a little bit of electrical work. When you're buying these bikes nowadays, the 1969, 70, and 71 were practically the same motorcycles, but the biggest difference came in 1972. In 1972 was the introduction of the Yamaha XS2. The Yamaha XS2 was produced between 1972 and 1974 with a cosmetic refresh and a disc brake now featured in the front of the motorcycle. The Yamaha XS2 is a very sought after model. But the biggest difference with the XS2 was the XS2 finally got an electric start. As I stated before, the XS1 was known as a very raw machine, and the suspension tuning was not up to par with some of its British counterparts. But with the XS2, they did quite a bit of refinement in the machine, and it handled a lot better. The XS2 is really when the XS started to hit its stride with upgraded features and things that the British bikes didn't have. In 1975, the XS2 ended production, and these bikes were now known as the Yamaha XS650Bs. As Yamaha continued to develop these bikes, they continued to update the tuning, update the suspension, and make them better and better each year with minor changes. But after 1975, the biggest things that changed were the cosmetics. And then in 1979, the XS650 standard production came to an end. But there was another model called the Special, which Yamaha started making a few years earlier. In 1979, Yamaha started making the XS Special. The XS Special was a more cruiser-style version of the XS650 with mag wheels and a little bit of a different seating position. The XS Special ran all the way until the end of the true production of the XS650 in 1985 for a 6-year production. The XS Special is sought after for one particular reason, and that's because in 1980 they actually introduced electronic ignition, and all the bikes before used point systems. So all standard XSs use a standard point system compared to the XS Special. Now, which one is the one to choose? Well, it kind of depends what you're looking for. If you're looking for a more cruiser style, something not too vintage but truly an 80s bike, the XS Special might be the way to go for you. Plus, they have the electronic ignition, but that can be swapped to the earlier models very easily. Now, if you're looking for an old school rider with the spoke wheels and still that vintage standard styling, the 1975 through the 1976 bikes might be your way to go. Some people say 75 is the most pretty out of the bunch. I have to agree, it's definitely one of my favorites, but for my heart, I still love that beautiful drum brake in the front, and I would love to own a XS1 or an XS2, or maybe both someday. If you're looking for that really old school styling, the XS2 is the perfect blend for rideability and style. These bikes do cost a little bit more, but there's less plastic and more metal pieces on them, like the starters even have a lever instead of a push button. There's a lot of British influence and just a little bit more bling on the XS2 compared to the Bs. Again, it really all depends on what you're really looking for. They're all fantastic bikes that almost offer a different thing with each one. Now, common issues with the Yamaha XS650 are the following. This is going to be almost a 50-year-old motorcycle, if not more in some cases, so there are going to be many things that go wrong with age. The XS is a very reliable, and if properly maintained and upkept, like this bike right here, will be a fantastic machine. But you need to watch out for pitting, corrosion, anything of the sort, especially on original OEM mufflers. I know we're out in the snow right now, but there's no salt on the driveway. For those who are kind of freaking out, don't worry. Things are going to happen with age. Just watch out for all of the basic things you would check on a motorcycle. Very important to check tire age, not just how the tire looks and the tread, but the actual age. If the bike has lower miles, or in many cases if they've been parked for a little bit and not rode for the last decade or so, it's going to need tires regardless of if the tires are brand new or not. That's something a lot of people overlook. Just because the new tires were put on it 10 years ago doesn't mean those tires are good. They're not good. Know that before buying it. It's something you're gonna have to spend money on. Fork seals. And a big thing is going to be the tanks. Open up the gas tank, see the condition of the inside of the tank. If there's a ton of rust in it, you're gonna probably need to do carburetors if the bike has been sitting. But these tanks will rust if not properly upkept, if not properly cleaned, flushed, and filled up. They will rust from the inside. You'll have to line it. That's going to be a cost you're going to have to put in it, or you're going to have to get a new tank if there's no gas in it, and it might leak. Another common issue with pretty much all older motorcycles is going to be carburetor work. Again, if the inside of the tank is rusted, chances are you're going to have to do some type of carb work because that stuff is probably getting into the carburetors. And even if it's not getting into the carbs and the bike has been sitting for a few years, if it's misfiring, if it's not idling correctly, if it's braking up under acceleration, all of those things are probably carb related. And like we were talking about earlier with the points and electric ignition, this bike's still on point system, so you might need to clean or replace your points if your bike isn't firing correctly. That's another very likely possibility. But the highest possibility and the biggest thing you're probably going to need to do with these bikes is the carburetor work. Now on cold startup, some of these bikes might sound a little rough and you might hear the cam chain vibrating a little bit. It's a very easy adjustment and something you should check right after buying it, or ask the owner if he's checked it lately or if it's ever been checked. Even if they say it's been checked, do not take their word and do it after you buy it. And if it's a little rattly under cold startup and it kind of goes away under a hot start, it's not the biggest deal in the world. Sometimes these motors are a little noisy. For the most part, you should be okay. If it's making very loud clacks and crunches, I would walk away from it. But if it's making a little chain noise and it goes away after a little bit, you're gonna be okay. For the most part, these motors are very solid, and there's a reason why they continued to make them for over a decade in basically the same configuration. Another major problem, something Yamaha has always had trouble with, is the electric starters. If you have an XS2 or later bike, your starter will probably sound like this. They don't sound very good, and sometimes they fail just altogether. Yamaha had some major issues with their starters in the early days, especially even going into the 80s. They just had problems. A couple of months ago, I also had a 2013 R6. That was also a bike that still had weird starting problems. Common issues with the Yamaha, and it's just the quirk, I suppose. But the starters in these do fail from time to time, and there's something that is easily repairable if your bike does have a failed electric starter. But keep in mind, you still do have a kickstart on these bikes if it does fail. So in an emergency situation, if it fails when you're out, you're not completely left stranded. Now, another thing about the XS, this is more of a maintenance tip than a common issue tip, but if the bike isn't quite running right and you can't figure out what's going on, check the age of your battery. The ignition runs through the battery, so all the power is coming from the battery, and if you don't have one that's properly charged, your XS could have weird sporadic issues. Also, when you're looking at the bike, make sure to bring a battery with you if the owner claims that the bike doesn't have one or needs a new one, because the bike will not start without a battery in it. Other than those few things, honestly, the XS is very solid. Things are going to go wrong with age, the brakes. Just make sure to do a thorough check over the bike. As far as an ownership experience goes with the bike, I haven't owned it for too long and I haven't put too many miles on it, but from all the reviews and everyone says these bikes are very solid machines. You should have a very pleasurable ownership experience. When you buy the bike, you might have a couple of things that go wrong with it. Most of the time when you buy an older machine, there's a few things that you need to adjust and do this and that, and there will be a couple of things that do arise in your ownership like that. As long as you stay on top of them, maintain them correctly, spend a little bit of extra time and a little bit of extra love every now and then on these machines, especially when you're doing the maintenance like oil changes and everything. Check the oil for metals, look over the bike, give it a thorough inspection, and fix anything that needs to be fixed that does come up. Now, when you're riding this machine, it's going to be very raw. They have a lot of power. It's honestly quite impressive as to how much power and punch these bikes pack for how old they are. but you're going to feel lots of vibration. You're going to feel every single undulation in the road. As I said before, they continued to adapt and improvise that suspension, but they never quite got it as smooth as some of the British machines. In a previous video, I compared my XS to my T140 Bonneville. Just riding that T140, you can definitely tell there was a lot more engineering, a lot more thought, and a lot more experience when producing a machine of that caliber. The Triumph frame and suspension around corners is easy, smooth, predictable, while the XS gives a little bit of a raw and unruly feel, and there's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. When we're looking at some of these old vintage bikes, we're looking for bikes with a ton of character to them, and the XS has a ton of character, and it is a little bit more raw, but that's the experience with the bike. That is just how they are. Now, they don't vibrate your head off, but you feel the vibrations, you feel the tingles in your hands and in the seat, but it's definitely livable. It is 100% not something that you're going to get on and absolutely shake yourself to death with. Here's a little bit of a rev comparison compared to my Triumph and my XS. When I rev the XS, watch how much the bike jumps back. The XS is such a special and fantastic machine. I hope I could provide just a little bit of insight into the ownership, things to look for when you're going to buy the bike, and everything I wish I had known before I had bought mine, or things I did know and I looked for when I purchased it. When Yamaha made this machine, there's a reason why this bike was very successful, and it's because a lot of people say that this is one of the best bikes to ever come out. I would say this is one of the most important, if not the most important, four-stroke motorcycle that Yamaha has ever made, even to this day. If you're looking to buy this bike and you're watching this video, you probably already know many of the things that make this motorcycle so great. And if you don't know the things about the bike and why it's so great and so special, make sure to click here.